soir, sur le soir, par exemple.
Non, il y a juste de la façon. C'est pas solaire, c'est en Allemagne. Non, j'ai même oublié de faire la demande de sortie. Ça va, mais je vais rester 13 ans, pas loin, c'est bon. Everyone available.
It's almost German here.
As we've noticed yesterday, everything is so close.
Very close. I did put a picture of you guys because I wasn't sure it was but then I just told a picture from the website. So I gave myself the same treatment as well. I just took the picture that's on the website. So it's not unfair that I'm just like
Look, I have a manga.
yeah.
I rebranded myself. Vaguely. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the. Why are you saying vaguely? I hope you're really news to me.
Of course I am.
Yeah. Can you please? Are you having coffee? Oh, yeah, I'll get some coffee.
Oui, dans 2 minutes, je vais déjà mettre ton nom. Voilà. Écoute, moi aussi j'aimerais bien un petit sac, mais je crois que t'es arrivé peut-être qu'ils vont distribuer 10 minutes avant, je sais pas. Mais tu devrais avoir un petit sac aussi. On va boire un café, une café quoi en fait.
This one in Japan 5 years ago.
Yeah, because this one is a reimpression.
Yes, yes.
And so this one is a new one, but you already had it in your bag.
Yes, okay.
So, yeah,
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would like to know.
Yes, please.
Mr. Nori, the former director of Afghanistan Archaeology Department.
Yeah, he told me.
Yeah.
So,
He was great on
Afghanistan, but my grandfather used to work in Afghanistan.
He gave a lot of international scholars a lot of help in the past time when he worked in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's huge work.
Yeah.
But soon it will be your turn.
Huh?
Soon it will be your turn.
Yeah, I'm working because at the end of my thesis, as I'm working on my homework, so after I submit my thesis, I want to publish my thesis.
Yeah.
So definitely, could be not like this. For stars, you know, it's red color.
For you?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Je peux lui donner une pochette? Il faut aller chercher des tote bags. Ah, les tote bags? Ouais.
On a un carton, mais
No, but if you want, we can send them by post. You just give me an address and I can send it to them.
Yeah.
Of course, I can send it to you.
Perfect.
You just give me where I should send them.
Direct to my waist.
I can send
I
you.
will write in the email. Yeah,
So if you
exactly.
want, so you
Yeah.
can leave them.
Yeah.
Because it's quite heavy.
Yeah.
If you want to take one, just
Maybe,
take
yeah,
one.
this one, yeah.
You take
Yeah.
this one because
Yeah.
you have one with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And we will send the other one.
Yeah, I will write to you. My address.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
voilà.
Voilà.
Le problème, c'est que c'est très lourd. Donc,
Oui,
on
un peu
a envie de partir avec, mais ça pose quelques problèmes.
Mais il n'est pas en voiture.
Mais non, on est ensemble. Et c'est d'abord que le truc de rien,
Mais les tote bags, je descends les tote bags à côté, j'oublie quand même de descendre les tote bags. Ouais, j'en mets juste à
Si
côté
quelqu'un
pour
est en
que...
voiture, on peut lui remettre une cartine.
Oui, oui, mais en
Voilà,
voiture, mais les
voilà,
gens sont pas venus en
voilà.
voiture.
Si, peut-être quand même certains.
Mais je vais descendre des tote bags. Si quelqu'un prend 2-3, il peut les porter. Après, ça reste à la place. Merci. Tu sens prêt?
Hein? Il est 11h. Et moi, il faut que je fasse la Mise ici.
À 11h?
Bah oui.
Ah bah, calme-toi, hein, parce que c'est 11h.
Comment tu parles?
Pas si fragile.
Non.
Pas très fragile.
And then you do a pre-introduction anyway, I think it's
Oh, that's
the second
true.
slide, so.
Yeah. Bien, rebonjour tout le monde. Donc nous reprenons le fil de ce colloque, nos places ou d'autres. Et nous avons le plaisir et l'honneur de donner la parole au docteur AshwiniLAKSHMINARAYANAN, qui est actuellement Marie Curie Research Fellow at Cardiff University, spécialiste du bouddhisme, qui a beaucoup étudié les questions de genre dans l'art du Gandhāran et qui va nous parler aujourd'hui de la mise en abîme. I guess everybody knows what is mise en abîme, considering the representation of stupa veneration in Gandhara art. S'il vous plaît.
Thank you for the kind introduction and good morning.
Microphone.
To everyone present here today and online. As you see, my talk is titled Mise en abîme, considering the representation of stupa veneration in Gandharan art. This presentation actually marks the maiden voyage of my Marie Curie research project titled Grave, Gandharan Relics and Ritual Veneration Explode. This is what happens when acronyms become obligatory. This project is undertaken with Max Dig and also in collaboration with Jessie and Stefan, both of whom are here with us today. The main objective of Grave is to understand how relics and ritual veneration are conceptualized within Gandhara and study them with comparative material such as inscriptions and travelogues of Chinese visitors in the region. Within this project, different forms of relics, whether they are bodily relics, including stupas, or what you may call contact relics, or relics of commemoration, including images, will be given prominence. Let us now turn to the representations of stupas directly, and it's always a pleasure to not introduce Gandhara and Gandharan art all the time here again. We are very familiar with the variety of architectural forms represented within the corpus of Gandharan art. The built environment in the corpus range from elaborate to very simple shrines, fortifications, pillars, columns, arches, funerary monuments, and palaces, among several others. Some of these buildings, of course, have been compared favorably to the available archaeological evidence, such as in the case of enterable or relic display shrines. In this context, where several visual representations of architectural features occur, my goal in this postdoctoral project in general, and particularly in this discussion, is to look more closely at the representation of stupa and stupa veneration. This is because stupa structures are central to Buddhist ritual activities, both in Gandhara and just elsewhere. It is also a point where many of our sources, literary, visual, epigraphic, converge, providing a greater glimpse of ritual practices that have been prevalent in contemporary society. Using the visual representation of stupas, this presentation, I hope, provides some clues on what artists, under the wider purview of the Sangha and the devotees, sought to repeatedly highlight within the sacred space. The representation of stupas in art is known from a handful of reliefs from Gandhara. For example, stupa and stupa veneration scenes are commonly part of the Buddha's biography. The continuous narrative panels which preserve the cremation of the Buddha, as you see here. I don't know if my mouse clicky thing works, pointer, laser. So the cremation and then of course, the veneration of this relic mound, sometimes distribution and separation of these relics into parts or reliquary forms that are, of course, also sometimes corroborated by archaeological evidence, and also the final internment of these relics into stupas. These stupas are commonly venerated by elegantly dressed male and female figures as well as renunciate figures. Apart from the biography, relic veneration symbolized by the stupa mound itself also occurs as part of the decoration of panels. For example, in this panel on the screen, you have the life of the Buddha in the bottom register, and of course a relic mound that is under an arch and also venerated by figures that are under arches surrounding it. Other reliefs, while they cannot be definitively identified with this biography, they still preserve some of the most elaborate depictions of stupa and stupa veneration. For example, this relief from Buddhara 3 depicts a stupa approached by two barefooted monks. Similarly, the other poorly preserved relief, which I could not find a better picture, I apologize, also depicts four figures surrounding a stupa. Other relief fragments only contain, these are also other examples that are very similar, where you have stupas that are surrounded by devotees who are venerating it by offering flowers or just in Anjali Mudra. So other fragments of stupas that we have are only just the architectural part. We aren't quite sure how and what they depict. How they depict veneration, and we can imagine that they also are focused somehow on stupa veneration. We just don't know how because of the lack of completeness of these reliefs. In all these reliefs, broadly dating from the 2nd century onwards, artists provide the same visual perspective of the stupa. The stupa with a high podium is frontally depicted, and depending on the space available, there's also pillars that demarcate the area above the podium. The devotees flank the sides of the stupa and they commonly venerate this building. Such images, I believe, highlight how the stupa may be viewed in order to observe the monument in its entirety. I will expand on this a bit further after these two illustrations. We already see the emergence of this podium in biographical scenes prior to the stupa veneration episode in the 2nd century. The image on the screens, the two images on the screen, for example, show the funerary mound that is placed on a podium or a throne and is covered by a cloth that also contains an undulating garland. The act of viewing the stupa is also known from drawings that occur in the Gilgit-Baltistan range. The rock carvings found along the mountainous passes provide a substantial corpus of images that date from prehistory all the way till medieval periods. The carvings are remarkably diverse. For example, the animals such as ibexes, which are usually categorized as the sort of earliest of these carvings, some sort of strange human figures, decorative motifs, travel scenes, and also Buddhist imagery. Among the Buddhist imagery, the three broad themes that sort of pop up are, of course, the representation of architecture, so stupas, the Buddha's biography, and the Buddha with devotees. The most well-known example of Buddhist architecture of course, is this particular image of a figure venerating a stupa. The image depicts a stupa with a long staircase, and it was likely carved, according to the inscription that is located next to it, by someone named Pushya. And if we here we can see how the carver, or sticking to more the theme of this conference, the artist between quotes, is probably this person who is standing next to the stupa. The emphasis on this image, including the other reliefs we've seen, is on the stupa itself and the act that the devotee performs right next to it. Something like a darshana, auspiciously viewing and venerating the stupa. We will see how this is also echoed by the archaeological evidence. In the aforementioned examples, including this drawing, in which the stupa is depicted, artists visually domesticated the biography of the Buddha by encoding motifs that were based on contemporary practices. For example, a relief from the Peshawar Valley depicts three moments of this final story of the Buddha: the cremation, the distribution, and also the veneration of the stupa. This is not unique, and obviously we can cite several examples of this kind of panels where these scenes occur. In these panels, the stupa that is supposedly constructed by the Mallas following the Buddha's Mahaparinirvana is also constructed on top of a podium. If we consider the earliest stupas were Indian, such as those from Bharut or Sanchi, these stupas are not erected on podiums. The same architectural form in Gandhara can also be identified in Dharmarajika and phase 3 at Budkara, which are also sometimes associated with this early Indian form of Buddhism and related to the Mauryan period. In these cases, the stupa consisted of a medi, this raised level, the anda, the drum, the boundaries, the vedika, and also the space between these boundaries where when devotees have access to ritual practice. However, the visual narratives of the Buddha's life story in Gandhara do not follow this type of stupa. Rather, they follow the podium type stupa that's also present in the archaeological evidence. The earliest stupas following this elevated podium form are dated usually in Taxila and Saidu Sharif I. In both these cases, the stupa was likely approached from the front, not much differently from the way that our Gandharan images conceptualize viewing the stupa. Such a change, according to Kuvayama, who's written a lot about this stupa on the podium and the origins of this type of architecture, was a reflection of a change in rituals that were observed by the devotees. According to him, the configuration of some of the smaller stupas in Taxila suggests that they were not meant to be climbed, but viewed from a vantage point in front of the stupa. In the case of Saidu Sharif, for example, which is pictured here on the screen, rather than performing circumambulation alone, the architecture also privileged some kind of darshana. According to Kuvayama, this regional Buddhist architecture was influenced by Western architecture. He compares them to some evidence from Ai-Khanum, but also Roman mausolea, and he considers them as some sort of offshoot of Western architecture because they arise in the 2nd century without a precedent. I'm going to put aside the origins of this architecture, and I want to return to the images again. Why did these stupas need to be viewed? That is, what is the purpose of making darshana? If we consider the various instances in the Divyavadana, seeing objects such as images and monuments was an important dimension of veneration. The Divyavadana or divine narratives was likely part of the Mula Sarvestivada Vinaya sometime around the 1st century CE and was redacted somewhere in the Indic North. It provides examples of objects, monuments, and peoples as sights one never tires of seeing. Rotman has persuasively argued that these texts lay emphasis on some objects that had to be compulsively watched. For example, in the Kotikarna Avadana, a caravan leader donated a jeweled earring that is used to repair a stupa. Once the stupa is repaired, the caravan leader sees the stupa and the text states, here again I use Rotman's translation, he saw that the stupa had become a sight one never tires of seeing. And at the sight of it, his prasada, this innate feeling that arises, and as a result people make dana, became even greater. Filled with prasada, he gave wealth that remained from the sale of his earring and a little more. The story does not say that he performed a specific action other than viewing the stupa, which is what propelled him to perform other ritual, which is the dana. Similar objects capturing the viewer's gaze is also listed in another avadana, which says, a mighty elephant, a king, an ocean, and a rocky mountain. One never tires from seeing these, or a Buddha, the best of blessed ones. If we consider that the Buddha and the stupa, an extension of the Buddha himself, due to the significance as a receptacle of his relics, it is not surprising that Gandharan panels emphasize the act of viewing the stupa. Here, I would like to borrow the Hege's words, only because they are infinitely better than mine. Buddhist pilgrims visited a stupa mainly to experience the unseen presence of the Buddha through proximity to his relics, enshrined deep within the mount. Similarly, Walter's analysis of later Buddhist texts regarded the stupa as the Buddha, since it was considered his nirvanic form. Seeing the images in this light, viewing the stupa can be understood as an important ritual that is performed within the site. Images seem to echo this viewing ritual by providing this frontal depiction of the stupa. Given that the majority of stupa veneration reliefs were part of decorations of stupas themselves, can we look at these images within the framework of mise en abîme? Although I am sure there are people, art historians here, better qualified to dissect this concept, I will stick to the limitations of my own knowledge. So let me briefly address the concept of mise en abîme. Mise en abîme originally developed, of course, as a literary theory. However, in art history, it has become some sort of a passe-partout technique for placing a copy of an image within an image, often in a way that suggests an infinitely recurring sequence. In simple terms, it refers to an image depicted within an image. At this discussion, of course, I don't want to get into self-referentiality because that requires more engagement with the data that I have not yet had time to make. However, I only wish to stress that the embedded image or the meta picture is not necessarily formally identical to the larger image, but it somehow informs or complicates viewing this larger image. The representation of the Gandharan stupa on stupa monuments can also be viewed within the framework of images within images. By embedding repetitions, the images of stupa worship sheds light on the relationship between images, figures, and creates a sort of common conceptual space in which rituals take place. For example, this elaborate relief on the screen, currently at the Dir Museum, likely decorated a niche in its original position. My objective here is not to debate the identification of this scene, although I refer you to the several publications that have been made. I would like to direct your eyes to the top upper register instead. Here the podium is substituted by an elaborate acanthus leaf which elevates the stupa. If we consider the different elements of the stupa, we can see how they make references to contemporary practices. And these elements have also been highlighted by excavation reports and art historical analysis. Take, for example, the vegetal ornament running along the drum and also the relief in the false gable on top. These elements can be associated, of course, with actual practice of bringing flowers, which we also have in images of stupa veneration, and the decoration of stupas by reliefs themselves. On this relief, I believe mise en abîme asks the viewer not only to look at the images and determine what they refer to, but also to consider the relationship between the intermediate repetitions. At one level, that should be the next slide, at one level, the representation of the stupa surrounded by worshippers is simply conventional. Our own experience of these images in the harsh light of museums, devoid of any context, deny much of the context in which ancient worshippers would have viewed them. The devotees, when reliefs could have been viewed, there are still question marks about that, would have done so when in movement as well as standstill positions, depending on the position of the image. I suggest that the reliefs of stupa veneration on stupas may provide a behavioral script shaped by practice and shaping practice and experience within the site, so both ways. They draw attention to the way in which the stupa and in turn the relics and the Buddhas exist within the stupa. The image depicts the stupa in several ontological spheres, radiating from within the stupa, such as the relic chamber, in which the bodily presence of the Buddha is established by relics, and of the exterior, in which the visual language emphasizes the presence of the stupa. Such interrelations between image of a stupa and the stupa itself is perhaps suggested by a relief fragment recovered in Chapel 527 at Barikot. The relief was found reused in this context with other pieces and perhaps specifically for this chapel. It was likely deliberately used here as it was a representative of the stupa itself, and in turn the Buddha. Moreover, the excavators at this site suggest that at this reuse phase that is dated to the 3rd century CE, the relief was deliberately marked by a series of parallel lines. Unfortunately, here you don't see them, but they mark their parallel lines marked everywhere. Would this secondary intervention be considered that of an artist? I'm sure we will all have our opinions on these questions. Whether stupa images reused or not may have invited new ritual practices is a question that I would like to engage with further in this project. For me, the preliminary engagement with stupa veneration in art has brought out the following themes. The reliefs ranging from the visual biography of the Buddha all the way to isolated representations of the stupa itself suggest that artists sought to conceptualize stupa in art as seen within their contemporary society. In these examples, few they may be, there was no attempt to relate the stupa's form to the early sort of Indian architectural form that would have been prevalent in the Buddha's homeland. The images do not present the circular stupa found in Sanchi and Bharat. Rather, the stupa on the podium is preferred as it can be associated with monuments venerated within Gandhara itself. They do not attempt, in my opinion, to present a map of the Buddha's biography elsewhere, but use architectural elements to ground the story within the local context. Thanks to a handful of works in the last decade, we already know how areas like Gandhara constructed sacred biographies by domesticating narratives. I believe that the tendency to highlight the Gandharan stupa on the podium in art not only reveals the artist's own familiarity with local architecture, but also provides yet another example or dimension to how places outside the Gangetic plain actively enroll themselves in the Buddha's life story. With that, I thank the organizers of the event for extending me this kind invitation, particularly to Alexandra, who stayed calm, I should say, with the adventures of yesterday. And as this is the initial stage of my project, I would very much welcome comments and thoughts that would guide its future directions. And finally, thanks to everyone here for their kind attention. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashwini, for this very new perspective at looking at the stupas in the stupas. I suppose there will be some questions and comments, please. I see no hands, no arms, not even a finger. No, no. S'il vous plaît.
I think you said sometimes we can see stupas without columns on the podium, and you said it's because of lack of place. Is it sure, in fact? Is it not a choice of the artist to represent these columns or not represent them? I think, in fact, maybe they represent older stupas when they don't represent the columns on the podium.
In the data that I've seen so far, it really came down to the size of the panels for me. So I think over the course, maybe this is a question, this is a point of view that might be useful for me. Thank you. Yeah.
Do you see, please?
Just a reaction to that. Actually, Luca Maria Olivieri, publishing the panel from Baricote, showed how the columns on the side tend to disappear in the history of Gandharan architecture because it was pretty much a liability.
Because of the earthquakes and stuff.
So there's also that dimension that we can take into consideration later.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Thanks.
Smooth.
Okay, Ashwini, we will discuss this after. Thank you very much. But there are few things I want to stress. The existence of votive stupas, which are not, there are no purpose of rituals. If you look at the Buddhist world, like Thailand, Sri Lanka, and others, and you have I can't imagine a main stupa where the relics are inside without a ritual. Right. Yeah. So it's so there are two things happening. You're absolutely right regarding the Bharut, Sanchi, and early stupas, especially Sanchi number 2. But still, you have the two pradakshinas, right? The lower one, then the upper one. So on a podium, what we see, what Semar has done in the excavations in Bamiyan in front, and also the things that Kuyama and others have published. So one has to be a little bit careful about it, and also the proportions and the dimensions and the depth. So most of the relief that you have four columns, it is squeezed in. So there should have been space for the pradakshina. We'll discuss this, but very interesting paper. Thank you so much.
Sorry, could I just quickly respond? Thank you for bringing that up, and perhaps I wasn't very clear in my presentation. The idea was to suggest that there was more than one way to venerate the stupa, either by pradakshina or by viewing. There's multiple levels of veneration, and thanks for highlighting that point. Thank you.
Just a small footnote.
Small question is okay. Okay, thank you.
Oh yes, please.
Yes, did you mention one famous carving in the Pakistan, Chilas 2? They have one stupa including the Kalosty, and also have one Haditi. It's Vesadeva 2, Vesadeva king. Okay. Why the Haditi and the stupa they are on the same pictures?
In this
Taliban 2, no.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Maybe.
I'm afraid I can't answer the question.
Okay.
Sorry for the brutal honesty.
Because it's very special, including they have the Kalosity inscription and one stupa and one Haditi. They also mentioned the Vesadeva, the age. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for your interesting presentation. And I have a curiosity about the relief showing the stupa emerging from the acanthus leaf. And what do you think about its symbolic meaning? Because often plants were associated with particular meanings. So do you have an idea?
I'm afraid, again, no, I did not think about it. I rather looked at the leaves as a sort of a way to depict the podium, but in a very ornamental manner, because this relief is, this particular artifact at the museum is very, very elaborate. It's very big. I think the scale doesn't come through in the picture, so I looked at it more as a way to depict the podium in a very ornamental way. But thank you for bringing that up. Something to keep in mind. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just want to say it is not just a leaf, a acanthus leaf. It's a capital.
Yeah.
An entire capital. So probably there is a meaning behind that, and we must look to. I think it's in Taxila. There is an illustration in Marshall books on a stupa, but on in a big size stupa, which was built like that, like a Corinthian capital, with a drum and Chatravali at the top. It has exist in Taxila, in reality, in concrete form.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm back to my footnote. Sorry.
I was hoping you would have forgotten.
No, it's not forgotten. About the mise en abîme, if we look at the mise en abîme in Western art, for instance, in Palermo, in Monreale, the monastery and the church itself is presented in a relief inside the monastery and inside the church, and it refers to a specific event. So there is there, in a typically Western way, time conception. So here it's not necessarily the same, as you said, the same time conception. So it could be either, as you said, an representation of the Buddha, symbolism of the Buddha, or symbolism of one, some sort of atemporal or eternal event. How can you precise a little bit the time conception linked to these representations behind?
I will gladly speculate at that point. No, I'm kidding. When I looked at it, particularly in the panels where you have the cremation scene and then the stupa, which is typically the Gandhāran podium stupa, I didn't consider it as atemporal. I considered it as a sort of a very deliberate way to use present and merge it to a distant past.
Reenaction.
Yeah, I thought about it in that way. Does that?
Because the time conception is rather cyclical in Indian cultures. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Well,
thank you.
I'm free to go. Thank you.
So now we welcome Dr. JessiePONS, Professor for History of South Asian Religions in the Center for the Study of Religions at Ruhr Universität at Bochum, and who is running important digitalization projects on Gandhara art. She's going to speak about crafting the Buddha's life story. So it's linear time. Across the Swat Valley, inside from the collection of Buddhist sculptures in the Dir Museum, Chakdara.
Thank you. Merci Henri-Paul pour cette présentation. Merci Alexandra pour cette invitation et au comité d'organisation pour leur travail merveilleux. It's a pleasure to be here, to see familiar faces again, and to meet new ones. And I look forward to the discussion in the forthcoming 2 days. Right, so my presentation focuses on the collection of Buddhist sculptures preserved in the Dir Museum, Chakdara. And I will begin with a very brief overview of the history of the collection and the recent digitization project that took place there, which I had the chance to co-direct with my colleague Frédéric Elvert. The collection comprises about 1,500 objects that were discovered in about a dozen of archaeological sites, which I will, present briefly, looking at the history of archaeological research on these sites and the meandering history of the museum collection. I will then focus on the history, because to me, it's really important to try and reconstruct the archaeological records to understand how these collections are composed as a prerequisite to the delimitation of workshops and production centers. And I will focus on the production from 3 different sites, focusing on selected examples that index interesting patterns connected to the production from what I call the Shaikot Talash Valley, and also with respect to how this production can be situated regarding other centers on the left bank of the Swat Valley and the Peshawar Basin. I must underline that this presentation is very much a work in progress, since the collection has only just been fully digitized and we've not quite, processed the whole data yet. So, I'll conclude with some avenues for future research. Right, so the Dir Museum Chakdara is located in the province of Lower Dir in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. It's a provincial museum which is under the jurisdiction of KP Dome, so the Directorate of Archaeology and Museum of the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. It was founded in 1971, inaugurated in 1979, and mostly to accommodate the Buddhist sculptures that were excavated by the Department of Archaeology of the University of Peshawar, directed by Dani in 1966-69. It was enriched through different donations, additional archaeological research. The nucleus of the collection is comprised of the Gandhāran material, but it also has other types of material. It has a rather important ethnological gallery, for instance. The collection was digitized by the DIGA project, which was funded by the BMBF, Bundesministerium für Bildung und Forschung. It's embedded at the Center of Religious Studies at Ceres in Bochum, and it relies on a very strong network of partners, the Italian Archaeological Mission in Pakistan, KP Dome, and the University Library of Heidelberg, which hosts the data. The project was carried out by two postdocs, Terena Otiero and Cristiano Moscatelli, and directed by Frederic and me, and also supported by student assistants. I'm extremely grateful to the team of the DIGA project, but also to our extended network of partners without whom this project could not have taken place. So the collection was digitized in 3 campaigns in 21, 22, and 23 to carry out 2D high-resolution photography with both members of the DIGA team and members of KP Dome. And last year, we carried out a 3D modeling of about 70 objects with the help of Kelin Setu, an archaeologist and a specialist in digital photography. The collection is now almost completely available on Heidekon, and there's still some data which needs to be processed. So the database is fully available on open access. I can share the link later. The objects come from a dozen sites, as I indicated, and they are distributed along the right bank of the Swat River, here, east and west of Chakdara, at the confluence of Swat River and its northern tributary. There are some sites in the Adinzai Plain, along the Shewak River leading to the Aspan Plain, in the Talash Valley, and the complete and somewhat here south of the river Swat, around the next to here can you see clear? Yeah, the Ranizai plain. So the list of sites is indicated here. The majority, as I indicated, was excavated by the Department of Archaeology of Peshawar University in the 60s and the 80s. And also by Dome more recently. However, some of these were surveyed or excavated, or perhaps plundered would be a better word, in the 19th century by Court, Leach, Raverty. So it's very likely that some of the material also lies in these other collections, British Museum, Kolkata, Peshawar. And as far as Andanderi is concerned, in fact, the material was distributed between Dir Museum and the Museum of the University of Peshawar. So the sequences that we have in Dir might be split, and the rest of the material is possibly a few kilometers south of Chakdara in another museum. So, and it should also be said that in order to gain a finer understanding of the production from the sites listed here, one should also examine other sites which are highlighted in red here, so that are really in the vicinity. These are the sites of Nimogram, Chakpate, Alahadand, which have their own complex history of archaeological research and their own interesting meandering in other collections, which are listed here. My overview of the sculptural production will focus on the site of Andanderi, and I will be hopping back and forth between Andanderi, Chatpat, and Ramora. So these are in a perimeter of about 7 kilometers. So Andanderi is located in the Artisan plain, about 6 kilometers north of Chakdara and 1 kilometer 5 from the modern city of Uch. The remains consist of a main stupa on the east side, a monastery on the west side, 12 subsidiary stupas, and 2 additional stupas located between the main structure. Yeah, so you can see here. Dani identifies 3 periods of construction that span from the end of the 1st century of the Common Era to the 4th century of the Common Era. This chronology is based on stratigraphy, architectural comparisons, and the discovery of coin hoards. However, as Dani admits, these coins are made in bronze, in copper, and they're very worn, and they're barely readable. So this kind of weakens the reconstruction, chronological reconstruction that Dani proposes. He found 534 pieces of stone sculptures, many found in disturbed layers, likely due to activities of looting, or in reuse. So my aim here is really not to reconstruct the chronology of the site, but to highlight some interesting patterns that we noticed as we were digitizing the collection. And I will start here with a first example, a series of reliefs depicting male devotees under doors with pointed arches and voluted extrados and heavy pendants. They are separated by a semicolon of the Gandhāran Persepolitan type. The 20 or so documented examples display variations on this theme. The semicolon might be encased on the first row, as seen on the upper register of a relief with 2 superimposed registers and separated by a festoon. We can also notice different decorative bands running around along the intrados, and the male devotee, which you see here or here, can be replaced by a child, or on this example, a woman. The reliefs are carved in schist of various shades of gray by artisans of distinct craftsmanship, and they exhibit diversity. One particular fine example features figures of long proportions, deep carving, and a very fine, smooth finish. And these variations allow to reconstruct sequences, series, even if some of my attempts remain rather tentative. Dani documented the fine spots of these reliefs, and notwithstanding the uncertainties which I stated at the very outset, we may notice the following patterns. Now, the reliefs of the same craftsmanship were found in relation to 2 different monuments, here and here, Stupa 3 and Stupa 9, while reliefs of 2 different craftsmanship were found in connection with the same monument, and this is the case of Stupa 3, with this type of relief and this type of relief. So the possibility that the same artisan sculpted reliefs for several monuments on the site might be confirmed by the reliefs discovered around Stupa 7 and 10. And despite their poor state of preservation, these reliefs display significant stylistic similarities. The voluted raised round arch with carinated extradoors, the thickness of the frame, the curve of the volute, and the projecting brackets, and similar features are also found on reliefs that have with an unspecified find spot. Other reliefs from Andanderi provide valuable insights into the stylistic connections between Andanderi and sites along the east bank of the Swat River, and this is exemplified here by the reliefs discovered around Stupa 13 and 14, which are attributed by Daini to the earliest layers of the site. So first century of the Common Era, first half of the second century. The fragments featuring a lateral nave and the left outer jump of a false niche depicts a kneeling devotee within a multi-story edicola, adorned with two decorative bands. The edicola itself displays Corinthian columns and an architrave embellished with a saw teeth motif. In this architectonic element, and its decoration bears striking resemblance with fragments of a door jump, probably from Buddhara 1, which Fatshena attributes to what he coins the drawing style, which he relates to the earlier phase of Buddhara 1. Another example of the stylistic connections between Andanderi and the zone of Saibil Jondu. So these are the sites of Buddhara 1, Pandr, and Saidu Sharif, are further reinforced with these examples. So these are reliefs that were discovered on the left around, again, Stupas 13 and 14. On the left, we see fragments of reliefs which portray devotees facing the Buddha, who sits in meditation with crossed legs. The iconographic and stylistic parallels with reliefs found at Buddhara 1 can be seen in the depiction of the Buddha's bare torso, the monastic robe, which is like folding on the left shoulder, and the exposed feet. The devotees are depicted with their torsos leaning forward and the folds of their uttariya, which falls in a zigzag pattern between their legs, which is characteristic of other reliefs from Buddhara 1. On the right, we have a series of depictions of the Buddha which bear a resemblance with a head from Pandr. You may notice the oval-shaped face with the wide open eyes, the arched eyebrows, the circular urna, which is engraved, and a downward pointing moustache. The hair is depicted similarly with continuous waves flowing laterally and converging at the center, while the ushnisha, which is high and thick, is tied here and here and here with a string adorned with a central stone. And interestingly, these reliefs also come from the stupas 13 and 14 here at the top. And you may, well, it's probably difficult to see with the contrast here, but they are sculpted in the same type of stone as objects from Buddhara 1 and Saidu Sharif and Pandr, namely an extremely fine grain and schist of a green tint. The stylistic connections between sites in Shakot Talash and sites in the Saidu Jambil zone are also reflected in the production from Ramora, which is situated about 7 kilometers south of Andanderi. So at the top, again, a depiction of the Buddha sitting cross-legged with two devotees. They are dressed in a shamgati with both shoulders. The Buddha is figured here, dressed in a shamgati with both shoulders covered, These are all characteristics which we see again in a relief from Buddhara 1. You know, it's the rendering of the branches behind the Buddha's head. And on the bottom, two depictions from Ramura, which illustrates the dream of Maya, and on the right, probably the interpretation of the dream or the horoscope, which if you look at the feature of the faces, the square faces, their small pointed chins, and the hair with horizontal front lines, and the vertically treated strands, the cylindrical earrings that are worn by the female figures, again, find striking parallels with in this relief from not Buddhara 1, but Sayyidu Sharif, which represents the preparation for the Great Departure. Other aspects of the production from Andanderi, however, displays similarities, find correspondences in the production from sites in the Peshawar Basin. And here, the series of sea monsters that populate string triangular elements of the stair railings provide an example of this connection. These are hippocampes, ichthyocentaurs, and sea dragons, for which we find here pendants at Tareli, and this is was discovered around Jamalgari. You may notice how the sea dragon shares with his counterpart from Tareli the motif of the upturned snout, as well as the detailed treatment of the wings with the feathers curving forward and ending in a scroll. The connection with models which are more widespread in the Peshawar Basin is also confirmed by the next example here. The stair riser, which was discovered in situ on the lowest stair of Stupa 10, and which finds a very close parallel in Jamalgari. Both reliefs are carved with tritons separated by framed pilasters of the Gandhāran Corinthian type with a long flute on the shaft, both sculpted with the same fluidity of volume and the same attention to detail. The tritons are represented frontal with two spiral snake tails, and all are engaged in revelry, either holding musical instruments, cymbals, tambourines, double flutes, or drinking cups. And perhaps I can add a few words about the architectural context. The triangular string element would be attached to the side of the staircase, and the stair riser would be attached to the stair riser. And this arrangement of elements featuring the marine creatures and the stair riser seems to be more popular in the Peshawar Basin. I couldn't, and Hada, we have an example in Chakili Gondi. I couldn't really trace an example of these sea monsters on the string, triangular string, elsewhere in Swat. So if you know of any, please do let me know. Chatpat, perhaps I can turn to Chatpat, which is located 7 kilometers south of Andanderi at the confluence of the Swat River and its northern tributary. And the site of Chatpat also yielded a series of statues that reflect knowledge of the sculptural language of which is prevalent at the south of the Malakand range. The Buddha on the left is depicted in realistic proportions, standing on the right leg and adorned with a high ushnisha covered with very wavy strands. The folds of the Shangati, lateral and then central, align with the movement of the body, the slightly pointed collar of the Sangati and the youthful features of the face recall examples from Jamalgari. And this statue from Maitreya, with his hair tied in a Jata Mukuta, follows an iconography which is more typical of sites around, such as Takshibai and Saribalol. Chatpat also produced a series of narrative reliefs with separated scenes illustrating episodes related to the predication and the Mahaparinirvana cycle. The episodes are divided by pilasters of the Gandhāran Corinthian type, carved with a figure of the Buddha sitting in Padmasana, or with here a phytomorphic motif on a shaft. The base and the cornice, the base is undecorated, but the cornice is carved with these motif of saw teeth. And some of these reliefs almost certainly belong to the same sequence and probably were sculpted by the same hand, at least they belong to the same stylistic group. And in fact, many of them were discovered next to the same stupa, the same structure, so the stupa number 19. Some of these reliefs were published, and Fatshena attributes the reliefs to the naturalistic art of the Swat Valley. However, I'm more inclined to relate these sculptures to the production of the Peshawar Basin. The realistic proportions of the figures are certainly characteristic of the second, stylistic group, the naturalistic group of the Jambil Saidu zone, but the way the Sangati falls in a lateral fashion is more typical of the production from the Peshawar Valley. And here I would like to draw your attention to these two reliefs at the bottom, which find really striking parallels in the art of examples from Saribalol and Taktibai. The comparative iconographic study of the depiction of the Mahaparinirvana across Gandhara shows that the composition type used on the Chatpat relief, which depicts the numerous protagonists witnessing the Buddha's entry into Parinirvana, is more common south of the Malakand Hills than it is actually north. And crucial here is the motif of the Buddha lying on the site with the feet that are left uncovered. And this is, in fact, typical of reliefs from Taktibai and Saribalol. I couldn't really spot any elsewhere except for Shotorak. Now, the connection between Chatpat and sites in the middle Kalpani valley, so this is Taktibai, Saribalol, is made even more explicit in these two reliefs, one from Chatpat and one from Saribalol, which both illustrate on the right a Bodhisattva in Tushita and on the left the Great Departure. And both are separated with the same type of pilaster. There's a stupa carved on a Buddha carved on the relief from Chatpat, and the Deva, the Nagara Devata on the relief from Saribalol. The iconography differs a little bit, but the composition follows a very similar formula, and it's rendered with the same subtle quality. So just note the spacing between the figures, the halo and the umbrella, which both interrupt the cornice of the relief. Other similarities include the position of the Bodhisattva's back here, with the curve with the shoulders forward, the hand gestures, the soft point of the naked foot, the strappings of Kantaka, the male figure here emerging at the top with the same helmet with the outer rims, and the portrait of Vajrapani here at the top right, exactly the same position and the same hairstyle with curls. There's so much in these two reliefs that, to me at least, unmistakably indicates that they were crafted by the same artist. This overview from the material from Chatpat and other sites might give the impression that their production is solely influenced by one of the two productions from Saidu Jambil or Peshawar Basin. And to counter this notion, let me very briefly skim through two examples. The statues of these statues of the Buddha and of Bodhisattvas. They're immediately recognizable by their squat proportions, the rectangular faces, with angular features, the small tight lips, and the somewhat straight eyelids, which you can see in both the presentations of the Buddha and the Bodhisattva, which you really do not see that elsewhere, except outside of Chatpat. And these architectonic elements. So these are bracket spaces. I'm almost on. No.
I said nothing.
I see your look. I've come to know you during this all these years. You're Tushita? Okay. With a parasol, with a halo? Which one?
Hello.
Okay.
I've seen the weather.
So the one from Saripalol. Good. So yeah, these bracket spaces depicting therianthropic male figures, half human, half pig, half human, half elephant, with their legs bent inwards in order to touch their groin. They either hold cups or a bow and an arrow, and some even shamelessly masturbate on the bottom here. As far as I know, these grotesque figures have no counterpart in the rest of Gandhara, and they would alternate with these brackets that depict elephants, lions, the Buddha, soldiers, and zoomorphic figure here holding a cup, and which altogether would give a rather unique appearance to the monuments of Chatpat. So, what does this very brief overview of the collection of Chatpat suggest, of Chakdara, suggest? On the micro level, on the level of a site, the figures under the doors from Andanderi showed that the same craftsman or the same workshop was likely involved in the decoration of several monuments. Conversely, multiple craftsmen could collaborate on the decoration of a single monument. Whether this occurred synchronously or asynchronously, we cannot really tell at this stage. Examples from Chatpat demonstrate that the production can be highly specific and localized. Similar patterns are also evident in other pieces from the collection, which I didn't really have time to show. And on a macro level, on the level of the region from Swat and beyond, some aspects of the production reflect stylistic links with the neighboring sites and more distant sites. This is illustrated by the close affinity between material from Andanderi and Ramora, with sites from the left bank of the Swat Valley. Other stylistic parallels show a connection with production from Taktibari, Saribalol, Jamalgari, Tareli, and so on. So taken as a whole, the production from sites in the Shakot-Talash zone appears to be halfway between the styles of the right bank of the Swat River and the Peshawar Basin. And this composite stylistic language or sculptural language likely results from the unique position of the sites at the mouth of the Malakan and Mora passes leading to the Peshawar Basin and across the Malakan Mountains. And while some of the examples considered show stylistic parallels too striking to exclude the possibility that artists may have traveled between different production centers, sometimes covering a great distance, to contribute to local visual programs, it remains quite challenging to unravel the logics behind these stylistic ties, as these connections might indicate shared artistic goine, the possibility that sculptures were imported, that artisans traveled, and these ties implies different temporalities, different dynamics, and different agencies in the diffusion of motifs, different chronologies. Some the belonging to the same artistic goine is a very diffuse phenomenon, while traveling artisan a very punctual one. So, in order to gain a finer grain understanding of these phenomena, what would need an additional set of analysis and studies to bring nuance to my initial statements and remarks on this collection. And so to conclude, I would like to propose some directions for future research, or rather what I could see being the foundational elements of a follow-up project for the Diga project, which could encompass the reconstruction of the archaeological record involving the study of other collections to attempt to reassemble divorced sets, The reassessment of Dani's archaeological report to reallocate sculptures or sequences to their original positions. That could be carried out along with an examination of the structural history of the site, including a reassessment of coin hoards for potentially improving our understanding of the chronological sequence. So, Olivier, Osmond, if you're attentive. The art historical analysis of the material from each site, each in their own merit, and then comparing it to the sites in the vicinity in ever widening circles. And the petrographic analysis of the stone, an examination of the local quarries, both in the region around these sites, but also comparatively with sites in the Jambil Saïdou zone. We have a pretty solid corpus of data that was compiled by the Italian Archaeological Mission, but much less so from sites in the Peshawar Valley. And then finally, analysis of tool marks. And for this, we made provisions in the Digapol project to with a 3D modeling of these objects that will allow us to perhaps shed better light on the production techniques and compare them to what's going on in other sites in Gandhāran. So yeah, if you want to add some additional points to this to-do list, I very much welcome your suggestions. And if you want to collaborate with the project in the future, we're also very open. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jessie, for this beautiful communication in spite of your modest conclusion, which is programmatic.
Yep.
And not a big statement of achievements. I think you did, and your group, the DIGA project, is making interesting and more than interesting achievements. I remember when I was a student, the expression in French was, if it is not from the same hand, it is from the same workshop. So it was a sort of blanket expression.
Yes.
Now you go much beyond this, thanks to your accurate work and, well, beside the programmatic conclusions, already the feasibility is there clearly. So now I am open for a few questions.
One question.
One question, sinon ça va refroidir. Who? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for this presentation, and I congratulate you for all the work and making everything available online. It was just a curiosity. Has the work on the project been able to 3D reconstruct certain monuments or facades or any part of these monuments?
For 3D, so no. So we focused, in the DIGAF project, we focused on the collection itself, on the objects. We can see that some, as I indicated, some elements belong to each other, but we didn't really model that in 3D because you have to think of the workflow. And had we, if we had the opportunity to do the work again, we would do things very differently because you only discover things as you document them. So like a deeper, a better survey of the collection would have been needed before we distribute, before we decide on what we photograph, what we document first. But that's that for the future. For the sites themselves, they are being documented by KP Dome, by Abdul Samad and his team. I know that Mehran Ashraf, who was the representative of KP Dome with us for the project, is being very industrious in documenting this site in 3D. So the image that I showed at the very beginning of the presentation with these views of Ananderi, they are from the drone documentation of KP Dome. Yeah. So it would be nice to, gradually, it's really, as you said, it's programmatic.
So thank you very much all. Now this session is over. I thank you, the speakers and the audience. And,
As is German style.
So for the speakers, we will go for lunch, and you will have to follow me. But first, I will have to lock the door. You will just wait for me outside, and we will go together. And we should start again at 2 p.m. So this is why I'm sorry for only one question for you.
Oh no, but it's okay. I took more time than I should have. 2 heures.
Yes, so it will be locked.
That's what you asked what it was called, so that you could say something on it.
You have to leave the place, please. Jessie, before you kill the sun. Après, il faut y aller. Bon. Ok, il faut y aller. We have to go. Okay, thank you. We have to go. You can we check into the hotel. Okay, right. We don't come. You don't come. So we set lunch with you. Okay, check in then.
So if you want to take the food now because it's easier. Oh yeah. So
okay. This one's close. Maybe they have. Do you have a day? Tu veux have it? Stefan, if you check one of these.